AITA for not wanting to host Christmas after the family stole all the Thanksgiving food leftovers. Thanksgiving is my absolute favorite holiday. There's something special about it, the togetherness, the food, the cozy feeling of everyone gathered under one roof. I've always loved hosting, even though it's a ton of work. This year, my husband and I volunteered to host for the first time in a while. We were excited, but I was also a little nervous because, let's face it, hosting Thanksgiving for family can be a whole production. Still, I dove in head first because, in my mind, if you're going to do something, you might as well do it right. I started planning the menu weeks in advance. I wanted to stick with the classics, so we went all out: 2 turkeys, 1 roasted and 1 smoked, a honey-glazed ham, 20 pounds of mashed potatoes, because honestly, is there even such a thing as too many mashed potatoes, 2 big pans of dressing, sweet potato casserole, green beans, cranberry sauce, and gravy made from scratch. I even made homemade dinner rolls, which was a first for me. My husband teased me, saying it was overkill, but I didn't care. Thanksgiving is the Super Bowl of cooking, and I was determined to make it memorable. To help lighten the load, my in-laws brought dessert, and when I say they brought dessert, I mean they brought dessert. They showed up with trays of pies, pumpkin, pecan, and apple, cookies, and even some fudge. My kitchen counters were packed. It looked like a scene from a food magazine, and I was so proud of how everything came together. My husband and I were exhausted but happy. The table was set, the wine was chilled, and we were ready to welcome everyone. The day itself was nothing short of magical. From the moment I woke up early that morning, the house had been filled with the mouth-watering aroma of roasting turkey, buttery rolls, and the sweet, cinnamon-spiced scent of the sweet potato casserole bubbling in the oven. The kitchen felt like the heart of the home, warm and alive, every surface covered with dishes in various stages of preparation. As the day progressed, the doorbell started ringing in waves. First, my in-laws arrived, balancing trays of pies and desserts that seemed too beautiful to eat, followed by cousins, siblings, and their families, all carrying their own contributions or just their appetites. The house quickly filled with a kind of cheerful chaos that only happens on holidays. At one point, I stepped back and just took it all in. The kids were darting through the house, playing some kind of loud and entirely made-up game that involved a lot of giggling and shouting. The adults were clustered in little groups, sipping wine and catching up, the air filled with overlapping conversations that I could only half follow. In the dining room, someone was reminiscing about past Thanksgivings, while in the living room, my husband was deep into a discussion about football with his brothers. The hum of voices and laughter created a kind of background music to the day. It was the kind of noise that fills a house with life and reminds you why you go through all the effort to host in the first place. Then came dinner, the main event, and it couldn't have gone better if I'd scripted it. The food was laid out buffet style on the island, every dish steaming and ready to serve. As everyone piled their plates high, I couldn't help but feel a rush of pride. When we finally sat down, I glanced around the table and saw faces glowing with happiness and gratitude. People were digging into the food with gusto, passing bowls and platters, and occasionally exclaiming how good something was. The turkey was moist and flavorful, the mashed potatoes were silky smooth with just the right amount of butter, and the dressing, well, let's just say there were plenty of compliments flying around. The gravy, which I had stressed over, turned out perfectly rich and savory, and I was secretly thrilled every time someone poured it liberally over their food. At one point, my husband stood up to make a toast, and for a moment, the room quieted. He thanked everyone for coming and for being part of our lives, and then he raised his glass, encouraging everyone to share what they were thankful for. One by one, people chimed in with heartfelt words about family, health, and happiness, and I felt my chest swell with warmth. It was one of those moments that felt straight out of a movie, where everything aligns just right, and you think to yourself, this is what holidays are about. This is why we do this. After dinner, the energy shifted into that comfortable post-meal haze. People loosened their belts, leaned back in their chairs, and started to break off into smaller groups again. Some migrated to the couches to relax, others grabbed slices of pie or cookies from the dessert table, and the kids resumed their boisterous play in the backyard. My husband, ever the gracious host, grabbed a stack of plastic leftover containers we'd bought specifically for the occasion and set them out on the counter. "Help yourselves to some leftovers," he called out cheerfully, waving at the containers. I smiled, thinking what a thoughtful idea that was. Thanksgiving is about sharing, after all, and with the amount of food we'd made, I figured there'd be plenty for everyone to take home a little something. At that moment, I wasn't even thinking about the logistics of it all. I assumed people would take what they needed, maybe a plate of turkey, a scoop of mashed potatoes, and a slice of pie to enjoy the next day. The containers sat on the counter, a simple and generous gesture, and I felt a little wave of satisfaction, knowing we'd done our part to make the day special for everyone. After that, we went back into the front room to continue chatting. By this point, I was completely wiped out. Cooking all day and hosting for a big group takes it out of you, so I kicked back on the couch with a glass of wine, letting the warmth of the evening sink in. My husband and I stayed up for a bit longer, saying goodbye to people as they trickled out. When everyone was finally gone, I noticed the kitchen was spotless. The food that had been on the island and dining table was gone, but I figured my husband or someone else had packed it all up and put it in the fridge. Feeling content, I went to bed. The next morning, I woke up starving. You know how it is after a big holiday meal, you don't eat much the next day because you're so full, but by the following morning, you're ready to dive into the leftovers. I had visions of turkey, mashed potatoes, and gravy dancing in my head. I practically skipped into the kitchen, opened the fridge, and nothing. When I say the fridge was empty, I mean empty. All that was left was a sad little bag of turkey wings and half a bag of dressing. At first, I thought there had to be some mistake. Maybe the leftovers had been moved to the fridge in the garage. I ran out there, heart pounding, but no. Nothing. I stood there, staring at the empty shelves, trying to process what had happened. I called out to my husband, who was in the next room, still in a daze from the sheer emptiness of the fridge. My voice probably carried more confusion than urgency. "Hey, did we? I don't know, donate all the leftovers to a food bank or something?" It felt like the only logical explanation for what I was seeing. After all, how else could every single scrap of food from the night before, 20 pounds of mashed potatoes, 2 turkeys, a ham, countless sides, and an entire dessert buffet, vanish into thin air? He came into the kitchen, drying his hands on a dish towel, and gave me a puzzled look. "Donate? No. Why would we do that?" He paused, scanning my face for clues about why I was even asking. "What are you talking about?" I gestured toward the fridge with a dramatic wave of my hand. "It's gone. All of it. There's like, a bag of turkey wings and half a bag of dressing left. That's it." My voice cracked slightly as the realization sank in all over again. His brows furrowed, and for a split second, I could see the gears turning in his head as he tried to make sense of what I'd just said. Then, with an almost casual shrug, he said, "Oh, I did see Joe and his family packing up a ton of food last night." It took a moment for his words to register, and when they did, it was like a punch to the gut. My stomach dropped. "Wait, what?" I managed to get out, my voice rising slightly. I felt a mix of disbelief and creeping dread. He leaned against the counter, clearly oblivious to the storm brewing inside me, and started explaining. "Yeah, they were packing up leftovers after we set out the containers. I thought it was fine because, you know, we told people to help themselves." I stared at him, trying to keep my jaw from hitting the floor. "How much did they take?" I asked, my voice a little sharper now. Something about the way he hesitated before answering told me I wasn't going to like the response. "Well," he started, rubbing the back of his neck, "it was, a lot. Like, they weren't just filling a plate or two. They had gallon-sized Ziploc bags. They were scooping turkey, mashed potatoes, and dressing into them. I think I saw them with dessert trays, too, like the pies your mom brought. And those cookies. I blinked, struggling to process what he was saying. Wait. You're telling me they packed up gallon bags of food? And took the desserts, too? Even the stuff that wasn't ours? He nodded slowly, looking a little sheepish. I mean, yeah. I thought it was a bit much, but we said people could take leftovers, so I didn't want to say anything. I figured you knew. My hands were gripping the edge of the counter now, my knuckles white. 20 pounds of mashed potatoes, I said, almost to myself. 2 turkeys. A ham. 2 pans of dressing. Desserts. And you didn't think to ask why they were cleaning out the entire spread? He looked at me, genuinely confused. I just assumed they were taking some for their family and maybe to share with other people. I didn't think they'd take everything. He paused, then added, did they really clear out all of it? I didn't answer him right away. Instead, I opened the fridge again, almost as if I expected some magical portal to suddenly appear with all the food safely tucked away inside. But of course, there was nothing, just those sad turkey wings and the remnants of the dressing, sitting there like the remnants of my good mood. Finally, I turned back to him, trying to keep my frustration in check. Yes, they cleared it out. There's nothing left. Nothing. My voice cracked again, this time from a mixture of anger and exhaustion. Do you have any idea how long I spent cooking all of that? Do you know how much food there was? I thought leftovers meant, like, a plate or 2 for lunch, not an entire week's worth of meals for a family of 4. He sighed, clearly uncomfortable now. I'm sorry, I didn't realize it was that bad. I just figured they were being, efficient. Efficient? I repeated, incredulous. Efficient is bringing a Tupperware for a couple of slices of turkey. Efficient is not showing up with industrial-sized freezer bags and wiping out an entire Thanksgiving dinner. I was floored. Sure, we'd said people could take some food, but I thought it was obvious that meant a reasonable amount. A plate or 2, not the entire meal. I couldn't believe the audacity. This wasn't just taking a little extra for lunch tomorrow, this was outright looting. 20 pounds of mashed potatoes don't just vanish. They'd taken everything. Everything. I was furious. I couldn't believe someone would be so inconsiderate. It wasn't just about the food, it was the principle. I'd spent days planning, shopping, cooking, and cleaning to create a meal for everyone to enjoy together, and they treated it like a free-for-all. To make matters worse, they didn't even bring much to contribute. They showed up, ate their fill, and then cleared us out. Now, I don't know what to do. Christmas is coming up, and I'm supposed to host again, but I honestly don't want to. I'm still so bitter about what happened. Hosting is a labor of love, and I enjoy doing it, but this experience has left such a bad taste in my mouth. My husband thinks I'm overreacting, but I feel like my generosity was completely taken advantage of. Am I being unreasonable? Or is this as outrageous as it feels to me? Update 1. After staring at the empty fridge, I kept replaying my husband's explanation in my mind, trying to grasp how someone could have the audacity to pack up nearly all of the food from someone else's Thanksgiving dinner. It wasn't like I had offered up an entire catering service, I'd simply told people to take some leftovers, assuming they'd have the common sense to leave enough behind for the hosts. But Joe and his family? They hadn't just taken a little, they'd cleaned us out. The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. It wasn't just the food itself, although that was a huge part of it. It was the sheer entitlement, the lack of consideration, the blatant disregard for the time, effort, and money that had gone into preparing that meal. I had spent days planning, shopping, cooking, and stressing to make sure everything was perfect, and now I was left with a fridge so empty it might as well have been the day before grocery shopping. Meanwhile, Joe's fridge was apparently overflowing with the fruits of my labor. The audacity was almost comical, almost. I paced around the kitchen, trying to decide what to do. My husband, sensing that I was on the verge of a meltdown, quietly retreated to another room, leaving me alone with my thoughts. At first, I considered letting it go. After all, it was just food, right? But the more I thought about it, the more I realized it wasn't just about the food. It was about respect, or, in this case, the complete lack of it. I couldn't let this slide. I had to say something, if only to make sure this kind of thing never happened again. So, I grabbed my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found Joe's number. My hands were shaking slightly as I hit call, but I was determined to confront him. As the phone rang, I took a deep breath and tried to steady my nerves. When he answered, his voice was cheerful, almost smug, as if he'd just woken up from the best night's sleep of his life. It made my blood boil. I started off the conversation casually, asking how he was doing and if he'd enjoyed Thanksgiving. He responded enthusiastically, saying it had been great and that he and his family had eaten well. He even thanked me for hosting such a wonderful dinner, which only added fuel to the fire. I could feel my irritation bubbling to the surface, but I forced myself to stay calm, for now. That's when I made the comment about his refrigerator, trying to keep my tone light even though I could feel my irritation bubbling just beneath the surface. I asked if his fridge had broken yet from the sheer weight of all the food he'd taken home. It was a subtle jab, one that I hoped would nudge him toward some self-awareness without escalating things right away. But to my absolute astonishment, he laughed. Not a nervous laugh, not an apologetic laugh, an actual, hearty laugh, like I'd just told him the funniest joke he'd heard all year. "Oh no," he said, his voice practically oozing smugness, "it's fine. I managed to fit everything in really nicely. You should have seen it, it's packed, but it's all organized perfectly." He sounded almost proud of himself, like he thought he deserved a gold star for refrigerator Tetris. I could picture him standing there in front of his fridge, admiring his handiwork with a self-satisfied grin, utterly oblivious to how absurd the situation was. The audacity of his response hit me like a slap in the face. It wasn't just that he had taken so much food, it was that he seemed completely unbothered by it. No guilt, no shame, not even the slightest acknowledgement that he might have gone too far. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Who does that? Who takes so much from someone else's table, then brags about how well it all fit in their fridge as if they'd accomplished something? The sheer boldness of it was staggering. My mind raced as I tried to decide how to respond. Part of me wanted to keep it civil, to give him a chance to realize how wildly inappropriate his behavior had been. But another part of me, the part that was still staring at an almost empty fridge that morning, wanted to let him have it. I didn't hold back. I told him, bluntly, that I was absolutely shocked by how much food he and his family had taken. I explained that while we had generously offered leftovers, we had never intended for anyone to clear us out completely. I described the moment I opened my fridge that morning, expecting to find enough food to feed us for at least a couple of days, only to discover that nearly everything was gone. I painted a vivid picture for him, my empty shelves, my incredulous stare, the sinking realization that the entire feast we had prepared with so much love and effort was now sitting in his fridge instead of ours. Meanwhile, his fridge, as he so proudly pointed out, was stuffed to the brim, overflowing with the fruits of my labor. I told him outright that his behavior was inconsiderate, thoughtless, and a complete abuse of our generosity. My words were sharp, but I didn't regret a single one. Someone needed to call him out, and if no one else was willing to do it, then I would. To my utter disbelief, Joe didn't seem the least bit fazed. He didn't apologize, didn't acknowledge that maybe, just maybe, he'd taken more than his fair share. Instead, he doubled down. He told me, with an air of casual indifference, that we had told people to help themselves, and that's exactly what he'd done. To him, it was that simple. He didn't see anything wrong with it because, in his mind, he was just following instructions. I was floored. How could anyone twist such a simple, well-intentioned gesture into an excuse to strip someone else's kitchen bare? The mental gymnastics he must have done to justify his actions were beyond me. It was as if the very concept of moderation or basic decency didn't exist in his world. I couldn't decide whether to be angry or impressed by the sheer audacity of his logic. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my voice, and explained, again, that when we said people could take leftovers, we had meant a reasonable amount. A plate or two, maybe even a small container for lunch the next day. Not gallon-sized bags filled to the brim. Not entire trays of dessert that other people had brought. I reminded him that Thanksgiving wasn't just a meal, it was a labor of love. I told him how much time, effort, and money had gone into preparing that feast, and how hurtful it was to see someone treat it like an all-you-can-eat buffet with a free-to-go option. And then I drove the point home. While his fridge was now overflowing with food that he hadn't lifted a finger to prepare, mine was completely empty. It wasn't just inconsiderate, it was downright selfish. I made it clear that his actions had crossed a line and that his lack of remorse only made it worse. But instead of apologizing, Joe laughed again. It wasn't the same hearty laugh as before, this one had a sharp, dismissive edge to it, like he thought I was being ridiculous. He brushed off my concerns, calling the whole thing absurd. "Come on," he said, his tone dripping with condescension. "You can't seriously expect me to bring all that food back. I've already put it in my fridge. What do you want me to do, pack it all up again and haul it over to your house? That's ridiculous." His words hit me like a slap in the face. Ridiculous? Was it really ridiculous to expect someone to show a little accountability for their actions? Was it ridiculous to ask for even a shred of respect after everything I had done to make Thanksgiving special? My heart was pounding, and my hands were trembling, but I refused to back down. I told him, as calmly as I could manage, that I was completely serious. What he had done wasn't just thoughtless, it was downright disrespectful. I said that if he had any decency at all, he would pack up the food he had taken and bring it back. I reminded him that it wasn't just his actions that were the problem, it was his attitude. The way he had so casually dismissed my feelings, as if they didn't matter, was almost worse than the act itself. There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and for a moment, I thought he might actually apologize. But instead, he let out a long, exasperated sigh and said, with barely concealed irritation, "Fine. If you're going to be so greedy about it, I'll bring it back. Happy now?" Before I could respond, he hung up, leaving me standing there with the phone still pressed to my ear, stunned by what had just happened. I couldn't decide whether to laugh, cry, or scream. The sheer gall of it all was almost too much to process. Joe had taken everything, acted like it was no big deal, and then had the nerve to call me greedy for wanting back even a portion of what he had taken. Update 2. I was still reeling from the conversation with Joe when I heard a knock at the door later that afternoon. My stomach churned as I walked toward it, half expecting him to show up with some kind of excuse or, worse, an argument. But when I opened the door, there he was, standing on my front porch with a smug expression on his face and holding several large, mismatched pots in his hands. His body language was casual, like this was just another errand he was checking off his to-do list. He gave me a pointed look and said, "Well, I kept my promise." I was taken aback for a moment, unsure of how to respond. My eyes flicked down to the pots he was holding. They were old, dented, and didn't match at all, clearly whatever he'd grabbed in a hurry from his own kitchen. I reached out and took one from him, suddenly aware of how heavy it was. When I asked him to bring back the food, I had envisioned him returning it in a somewhat organized manner, containers, trays, maybe even a few plates. What I wasn't expecting was, whatever this was. Curiosity got the better of me, and I carried one of the pots into the kitchen while he followed me with the others. Setting it down on the counter, I cautiously removed the lid. The sight that greeted me made my stomach churn. Inside was an unappetizing, chaotic mess, turkey chunks floating in what looked like gravy, mashed potatoes mashed even further into an unidentifiable paste, bits of sweet potato casserole stuck to the sides, and flecks of green bean casserole mixed in. It was as though someone had taken every component of our Thanksgiving meal and stirred it together into a grotesque Thanksgiving stew. I opened the second pot, hoping against hope that it would be different, but it was more of the same. This one had pieces of ham swimming alongside cranberry sauce, dessert crumbs scattered throughout, and something that might have been dressing at one point but was now a soggy, unrecognizable mush. The third pot was no better, a similar hodgepodge of textures, colors, and smells that made my stomach turn. It was all just mixed together. Everything. The food I had spent days preparing with care and precision was now reduced to this sad, sloppy mess. I stood there in stunned silence for a moment, trying to process what I was looking at. It was almost impressive, in a horrifying way. How could anyone think this was acceptable? Finally, I turned back to Joe, who was leaning against the counter, looking completely unbothered. If anything, he seemed amused by my reaction, as though he had anticipated my shock and was reveling in it. I asked him what this was supposed to be, gesturing at the chaotic contents of the pots. He shrugged, that smug smile still plastered on his face, and said it was all the food he had taken. He explained, with an infuriating nonchalance, that he had thrown everything into these pots to make it easier to carry. My jaw dropped. Easier to carry? I couldn't wrap my head around it. This man had packed the food neatly into containers and bags when he took it from my house, so why was it suddenly too much trouble to return it the same way? The logic, or lack thereof, was baffling. I pointed out the obvious: nothing had stopped him from taking the food home in its original form. He had happily carted off trays, Ziploc bags, and even dessert platters without a second thought. But now, when it came time to return it, he decided it was too much effort to do the same. Instead, he had dumped everything into a few pots, completely mixing it all together, without any regard for what it had been or how it might look when it came back. Joe didn't seem to care. He smirked and said it wasn't his problem. I had asked him to bring the food back, and that's exactly what he had done. He wasn't about to go out of his way to return it in the same condition it had been when he took it. He had done what I asked, and as far as he was concerned, the matter was settled. He even seemed amused by his own ingenuity, as if the very act of dumping everything into pots and delivering it this way was a stroke of brilliance. I was utterly speechless. The sheer audacity of it was staggering. It wasn't just the laziness or the complete lack of consideration, it was the smugness, the way he seemed to take pride in reducing our carefully prepared Thanksgiving feast into this unrecognizable sludge. It was insulting on every level, a blatant display of disrespect for the effort and care that had gone into the meal. And yet, there he was, standing in my kitchen, laughing to himself as though he had pulled off some kind of masterful joke. He stood there for a moment longer, clearly waiting for me to say something. When I didn't, he let out a chuckle, turned on his heel, and walked out the door without so much as a goodbye. I heard the sound of his car starting and driving off, leaving me alone with the remnants of what was supposed to be a beautiful Thanksgiving dinner. The pots sat there on the counter, their contents a vivid reminder of just how far this situation had spiraled out of control. I felt a wave of emotions: anger, frustration, disbelief, and a deep sense of disappointment. This wasn't just about the food anymore. It was about the principle, about the sheer lack of respect and consideration that Joe had shown throughout this entire ordeal. I couldn't believe that someone in my own family could behave this way, and I couldn't shake the feeling that this was a moment I would never forget, for all the wrong reasons.